I want to bring in Democratic presidential candidate, Senator Bernie Sanders, independent of Vermont. Senator, I want to start. I've been watching the broadcast you've been doing, sort of laying out your vision for this. And I want to start with an argument about assistance to large companies, particularly, that I've heard, and get your response to it, which is basically the opposite of what Joseph Stiglitz was saying. Was, look, in 2008, the financial industry and the real estate industry, they really did just crash themselves and then ask for a bailout. And there was a real problem of moral hazard. In this case, it's not like the companies that are suffering brought this on themselves. It's just a virus. Like, we shouldn't be thinking about it as a bailout. We shouldn't be thinking about moral hazard in the same way. What's your feeling about that?
Well, my feeling is that you cannot simply give $50 billion to the airline industry. And of course, this crisis is not their making. But you can't just give them that money to do anything they want. If we're going to bail out the airline industry, if you're going to bail out tourism, if you're going to bail out hotels, etc., what you have to do is make sure that that money is going to protect working people. And what you're seeing in the United Kingdom, in other countries, is they are saying to employers, if you retain your workers, even if you furlough them, even if they're working from home, they're going to continue to get the paycheck that the government is providing. So bottom line is, yes, I do understand that major industries, through no fault of their own, are in trouble. But our job is not to make these industries richer, not to allow them to do stock buybacks, but to protect the workers in those companies.
I wanted to get your reaction to one provision that seems a sticking point in the latest negotiations is about disclosure. This is really striking. As the legislation is currently written, I'm quoting the New York Times here, Mr. Mnuchin, Treasury Secretary, would not have to disclose the recipients of these, grants, loans given out by the Treasury until 6 months after the loans were dispersed. What do you think of that?
Well, I know you know what I think about that. I think that that is totally insane and unacceptable. Can you imagine giving the Trump administration $500 billion, and by the way, in the midst of an election, to do anything they want with that money, to give the money to any company they want, any state they want, with no transparency at all? That is absolutely wrong. Look, Chris, the truth is right now, we face at this moment, in terms of the pandemic, in terms of the economic meltdown, the most serious set of crises that have been faced in this country perhaps for 100 years. And our job right now is to think big, is to act in an unprecedented way, both in terms of healthcare and in terms of the economy. And it is going to cost a lot of money, but not spending that money now will make a bad situation even worse. Because, as you know, there are some people out there who are talking about, by the end of June, unemployment being 20, 25, 30%. So right now, our focus has got to be, in my view, to make sure that all workers in this country are kept whole, they continue to get their paycheck, to make certain that, in addition to that, people get a check of $2,000 a month, to make certain right now that we move in an unbelievably aggressive way to make sure that our healthcare providers, our doctors and our nurses are not dying on the job trying to protect us. And that means that Trump has got to enforce in a vigorous way the Defense Production Act to make sure that companies now are not producing T-shirts and underwear. That is not our major need at the moment. Masks, gowns, gloves are the need. And companies have got to do that. Some are already voluntarily doing it. They need to be compensated well. But they got to transform their production capabilities to deal with the crises that we face right now. The other thing I think, Chris, is that while Congress, and there are going to be people up all night right now working on this $2 trillion bill, people are working really hard. They understand the extent of the tragedy. We also have to take a deep breath and ask how we got to be in a country where so many people are in financial despair right now. What I worry about is that at a time when half of our people are living paycheck to paycheck, those paychecks are stopping. There are people out there watching this program who are saying, I can't feed my kids tomorrow. How did we get there? How do we have a healthcare system which was so unprepared, among many other things, for this epidemic?
Look, final question for you, Senator. I know, obviously, you're running for president of the United States. You have been for a while. It's basically you and Joe Biden, the last people in the race. You were asked by a reporter, I think, last week, and you said something to the effect of, I'm effing dealing with a global pandemic, which I found a reasonable reaction, actually, given what's going on. But I do wonder, like, how would you characterize the state of the Sanders campaign at this bizarre crisis moment?
Well, I think you used the right word, Chris. We are in a bizarre moment. You well know, I love to do large rallies. We've had rallies for 10, 20, 25,000 people. We're not doing rallies. We have an extraordinarily strong grassroots movement of hundreds of thousands of people who are knocking on doors. Guess what? Nobody is knocking on doors right now. So what we are doing is transitioning our campaign to a virtual campaign. We had a wonderful town meeting last night with several of the leading members of Congress, which I thought was very productive and a large viewing audience. So we're kind of moving day by day.
All right, Senator Bernie Sanders of Vermont, thank you very much for being with me. Appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Chris. Take care.